So, folks, it's all about geopolitics. A lot of stuff happening in obviously between Russia and Ukraine and the rest of the world. Russia stands isolated, except for, I guess, a couple of camp followers, India included. That's shameful. But hey, what am I reading? Right, which had lots of had people up in arms in India. People had it up in arms in Europe. Was Putin orders nukes on alert after West removes Russian banks from SWIFT. Then he said Putin nuclear alert forces Ukraine into talks. Now taking him away from SWIFT has been a swift action, right? And I don't think he expected it, nor did the oligarchs expect their assets to be frozen across the globe, and nor did the Central Bank of Russia. Apparently now there is talk which has not got underway in Europe, Britain and the rest of the world, that all oligarch assets across the world, whether apartments, yachts, planes, are going to get seized. No DEFCON 3 yet, but fear of superpower confrontation remains. Russia, Ukraine hold talks as fierce fighting continues. Ukraine, Russia battle for control. Russian advance slows. Battle for Kiev rages. This is one of the biggest setbacks, is that there is probably fear in the back of Russia's mind of this war getting bogged down in Kiev. And do remember, bombing alone doesn't do much. It destroys assets, but it does not stop resistance, right? As long as arms keep flowing in. And the lessons Russia must learn from what happened in World War II with Germany and themselves, what happened to Russia in Afghanistan, what happened to the US in Afghanistan. Just remember, as long as the arms keep flowing in, and while Stinger made all the difference against Russia in Afghanistan, the Javelin could do the same, folks. Do remember, in Ukraine. What I think about this is going to come later. Trenches and Molotov cocktails, Kiev digs in. Civilians take up arms to fight back Russians. Rockets rain down on Ukraine's number 2 city as initial talks end without success. For India, 4 ministers deputed to overseas evacuation of stranded Indians. Do remember, women, Indian girls are being trafficked. Rumors are being spread by the Russians that the Ukrainians are holding these girls as hostage or holding them as shields. There's absolutely no reality in that, but Russia is going to keep doing that to keep building and amping up the anti-America and West opinion in India, which seems to be working. India, China, UAE abstain from UN vote deploring invasion, 11 support. Like I said, disappointed US Senator of India abstention from UNSC resolution, and Sanjay Baru back out from his bill. Abstain but get stronger. Being neutral between East and West is not India's problem. Lack of strategic economic heft is. Now I'm going to tell Sanjay Baru. He seems to be not really an economic pundit, right? Because he should know. Whether it's the United States and China, China only got stronger because of America, technology stealth, technology stolen, and biggest of all, running a huge trade surplus with the United States and the West. It doesn't happen in isolation. How do you expect Mr. Sanjay Baru to become economically strong? By buying S-400. I want to ask you that. I want to debate people like this. We should be spring cleaning all these old guys out of India, right? Facing Ukrainian ire after India's UN move students. Well, I don't blame the Ukrainians. India to dispatch Ukraine aid bolsters its evacuation effort. Now, this is important. This is a message to Russia that we'll continue to strain Ukraine in some form or fashion. Putin puts nuke deterrence forces on alert. West huddles. Will Putin use nuclear weapons? I doubt that very much. With the United States. Now, what is the other thing that's happening? That's a big fallout for the Russians. They didn't expect this, right? Invasion forces Germany to ditch decades of reluctance in raising its military profile. Berlin to spend 100 billion on defense. Putin responsible. Russia under pressure as sanctions bite. They surely do. Belarus on the radar for aiding Moscow with invasion. Belarus is toast. More countries join in barring Russian flights. The next I hear, apparently, Boeing and Airbus are stopping servicing of all Russian fleets. That means sayonara, sayonara. Switzerland sets aside tradition of neutrality to freeze Russian assets. Now here we go. This is the first one. I think Russia didn't expect that, neither did the oligarchs, right? Leaving behind post-war guilt, Germany earmarks 100 billion for investment in army in 2022 alone. Germany, Russia is toast, right? Here comes the Nazis after them, right? Chinese businesses, Kiev plan under risk following Russian attacks. So China is also beginning to waffle, right? Because secondary sanctions are going to hurt the equivalent of the oligarchs in China who are fat and happy with all their slush funds in dollars. UK, Germany, EU nations rushing in supplies, arms are flowing in. EU to shut airspace to Russian airlines to buy Ukraine arms. Turkey calls invasion war may limit Russia Navy passage, and apparently it's done that. Another nail in the coffin of Russia. Putin, I think, is bitten off, in my opinion, more than he can chew. Cheers. So, quick readout of today's papers. Hindustan Times. Russians shelling strikes Ukraine public facilities. Crude oil soars to 113 as crisis worsens. Modi speaks to Putin, discusses safety of Indians. Zelensky says Russia wants to erase Ukraine. Putin has miscalculated. Biden vows to stop Russia. UNGA votes to deplore crisis. India, as usual, abstains. And more flights come in as evacuation picks up space. So that goes on. What else do we have? India asks students to leave Kharkiv as fighting rages on. Russia humanitarian corridor in the works. Jyoti Scindia, 5,000 students to return from Romania by Friday. PM Putin discussed safe evacuation of Indians. And that is what we have as far as Hindustan Times had today, right? Then what do we have? Times of India. Times of India basically said today, India again abstains on UN vote. Modi calls Putin government asks Indians to leave Kharkiv even on foot. After long walk, struggle to board train at Kharkiv station. Indians held hostage, claim both sides. Ailing student dies. Price hike ahead as Brent hits 8-year crude. Pak, China among 35 neutrals, 141 countries, anti-Asian move. India is now out on a limb, folks. Out on a massive limb. And I'm not sure how long it can carry on doing that, right? US curbs on Russia won't hit IAF significantly, Vice Chief. I think they will, right? Indians being used as human shields by Ukrainian forces, claims Russia. Azerbaijan to Zagreb, more options for medical students now. Okay. Russian forces move to encircle key cities. Indiscriminate bombing, says Ukraine. 2,000 civilians reported dead. Putin miscalculated and he will pay for it, warns Biden. NATO nations pour arms into Ukraine, risking conflict with Russia. Lavrov says a third world war would be nuclear destructive. Kremlin planning to declare ex-president new head of Ukraine. Now that's interesting, right? Big tech restricts Russia state media and they are a problem. Georgia to apply for EU membership, another huge issue. Chinese national hurt. UAE tightens entry for Ukrainians. Vulgar comments on Ukraine women in China services, right? Ukraine soldier reciting Persian poem. That's kind of interesting, right? And that's what you have in Times of India. What do you have in the Economic Times? Economic Time proper. Here's another one. Indian Express. Modi, Putin talks. Russia says Kiev holds students hostage. Will work on way out. India, China, Pak, Lanka in 35 to abstain. Russia, Ukraine conflict to drive airfares higher. Okay. Russia assures India of steady defense supplies, folks. Let's get out of this trap of Russia, folks. Cheers. So all those guys who talk about abstaining and balancing act and all that, got to hear what, and this is the reality, and this is what Avinash Paliwal writes. India should reconsider its Russian dependence. He says Delhi's inability to call a spade that what it truly is with Moscow marks a dependency that limits, not enables, the country's strategic autonomy. That's true. Russia's war in Ukraine brings India's conflicting interests in the transatlantic and Indo-Pacific into spotlight. It belies India's attempts to dehyphenate these theaters in a bid to focus global attention on China. If the act of war is insufficient to show that these political geographies are interconnected, the Russian foreign minister clarified it in so many words during a meeting with his Pakistani counterpart on the day of the invasion. The impression that China and Russia are coordinating to hurt India and its allies undermines New Delhi's bid to balance China externally without considering how geopolitically corrosive Moscow's alignment with Beijing truly is for its own interest. Then he says, India's inability to call a spade, that's what he said, it's limited effect. It's a marker of a toxic dependency that limits, not enables India's strategic autonomy. For if Russia's adventures make New Delhi worry about a possible US-China detonate or losing a trusted arms supplier, then it's a sign that something is lacking in India's strategy as an Asian counterweight. It is true that reducing defense reliance is neither an easy nor quick process, and India must not rock the boat with Moscow prematurely, but having excused Russia's excesses in Hungary 56, erstwhile Czechoslovakia 68, Afghanistan 79, Georgia 2008, and Crimea 2014, the Ukraine war should make India reconsider its arms dependence on Moscow. So here we have Russia's war on Ukraine will assist rise of China. Written by Shishir Gupta. Bunch of bunkum. It ain't going to do that. It's going to, in fact, what has shown, I have told you, double down. NATO's become a cohesive unit and double down by United States on the Atlantic, on the Pacific. With US NATO staring at Russia for this time to come, China will get a free pass in the Indo-Pacific. My call on that, folks? Absolutely not. Then you have Atul Mishra, right? Ukraine, the state of play after invasion. Ukrainians suffer. Europe revises its strategic architecture and it's downhill for Putin and Russia. He says, what about the Western response? Berating the West is easy, but it is useful to remember that genuine democracies are slow strategic beasts. Nevertheless, the grouping has begun to respond seriously and in unison. Once considered obsolete and by Donald Trump a drain of American money, NATO has been revived. He says, but it is very likely that Russia and Putin have been put on a downhill path. For Putin's personally, it is the beginning of the end, like I told you folks. And what do we have? What does Sham Sunrise? What Russia stands to lose, irrespective of how the Ukraine war ends, Putin will lose the plot. What he says is, it was expected that India would not support any Security Council resolution condemning Russia, but the Indian statement explaining its vote of abstention comes fairly close to criticizing Russia's resort to arms. Unlike China, India has neither criticized NATO nor made any comment about the expansion of NATO as a trigger for Russian action. It has reiterated the principle of respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states and stated that all member states need to honor these principles in finding a constructive way forward. More importantly, there is an implicit criticism of Russia in the expression of regret that the path of diplomacy was given up. A resolution condemning Russia is now likely to be introduced in the UN General Assembly, where there will be no veto available to Russia against its passage. Russia can no longer be certain that the large constituency of developing countries, including African countries, will vote against or abstain on the resolution. The strong condemnation Russian action by Kenya is a pointer to the sentiments among African countries. It will be interesting to see how far China will be ready to deploy its considerable influence among the developing countries, in particular African countries, in support of Russia. It may be hesitant to do so in the light of international opinion shifting unmistakably against Russia. And China has done the same, folks. There goes the Russia. We need to get off and smell the coffee. Jai Hind.